This is my true story. My son disappeared in 1983. One summer night he left the house saying he'd be back before dark, but he never returned. For years I searched, waited, and prayed, holding on to hope that time refused to answer. The world forgot him, but I never did. Then, last night, while watching the news, I saw something that froze my blood. A mugshot appeared on the screen. The face was older, worn, and lined with years. But it was him. My son. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It was July 17th, 1983. The sun had gone down behind the cornfields, leaving the sky a dull orange fading into gray. My son said he was going out to meet a friend from work. He was 24, full of plans, proud of the promotion he had just gotten. He promised he wouldn't be long. I watched him pull out of the driveway in his old red pickup. The tail lights disappeared around the bend, and that was the last image I ever had of him for 42 years. At first I didn't worry. He was young, responsible, always on time. But midnight came and went, and the house stayed too quiet. I tried calling the friend he said he was meeting, but there was no answer. By morning, his bed was still untouched, his jacket still hanging by the door. Something felt wrong deep in my gut, that heavy silence only parents understand when danger touches their children. By sunrise, I was driving through town, retracing his route. I passed the gas station where he used to stop for coffee, the diner where he liked the pancakes, the small bridge that crossed the river near the old mill. That's where I saw it. His truck. Parked to the side, driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. The driver's seat empty. I got out and called his name until my throat hurt. The wind answered. I looked over the bridge railing, expecting to see something. Tire marks, footprints, anything. There was nothing. Just water moving slow, carrying the reflection of the gray sky. The police came later that morning. They marked the area with tape and searched. They asked questions. Was he upset? In debt? Fighting with anyone? I said no to all of it. He was fine. He had plans. He had just bought a new set of tools for work. He wasn't the type to run. For the first few days, there was hope. The officers said maybe he got lost or had an accident. Volunteers searched the woods. The fire department brought boats and dragged the river. They found his wallet 50 yards from the bridge, wet but intact. No money missing, no struggle. Just a mystery dropped in the middle of a quiet Pennsylvania summer. His mother cried herself sick those first weeks. I stayed strong for her, but inside I was falling apart. Every sound at night made me look at the door. Every phone ring made my heart jump. People came by to bring food, to pray, to say they were sorry. I didn't want their pity. I wanted my son. Weeks turned into months. The flyers began to fade in the rain. The police had no leads. They said the same line every time I called. We're doing all we can. Eventually, they stopped calling back. I started sitting by the window every night, watching the headlights of passing cars. Every time one slowed down, I'd stand up, hoping. Then it would pass, and I'd sit again. I searched myself, drove to nearby towns, checked hospitals, homeless shelters, bus stops. I even called morgues, asking if any unidentified bodies had come in. It's a call no father should ever have to make, but I made it, more than once. Each time they said no, I hung up both relieved and broken. After a while, the neighbors stopped visiting. Life went on for everyone else, but not for me. My days became a loop. Wake up, stare at his photo, make coffee, walk the same empty rooms, go to bed, repeat. My wife stopped smiling. Our home became a waiting room. By the end of that year, the detective called and said they were closing the case. No new evidence, he said. I thanked him anyway. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't know what else to say. That night, I went out to the bridge one last time. I stood where his truck had been found. The river was calm, the air cold. I dropped a small wooden cross into the water. I told myself it wasn't goodbye, just a marker, a promise that I wouldn't stop looking. I kept that promise for 40 years. The first days after he vanished felt like a blur I couldn't wake up from. Every morning started with the same question. Maybe today someone will call, maybe today he'll walk through the door. I went from station to station, talking to anyone in uniform who would listen. Some wrote things down, some didn't. They all said the same words. We'll keep looking. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. My whole world became about finding him. I made missing posters on our kitchen table, cutting his picture out of the family album. I borrowed a typewriter from the neighbor and typed his name, age, and description over and over again until my fingers cramped. Brown hair, green eyes, scar on the chin, 24 years old. I printed dozens, maybe hundreds. I taped them to poles, store windows, gas stations, anywhere people might stop. At night, I drove through every back road, shining the flashlight across the trees, calling his name until my voice gave out. His mother sat by the window most nights, waiting for headlights. Every time a car passed, she lifted her head. Every time it didn't stop, she cried quietly. I told her we had to stay strong, but my own hands trembled too much to hold a cup steady. We stopped talking about normal things. No dinner conversations, no laughter. Just questions. Always questions with no answers. On the third day, a team came from the city with dogs. They searched the woods near the bridge. The dogs barked once, then stopped. They picked up a faint trail along the riverbank, but lost it near the water. The officer said, "It could mean anything." I knew what he meant. I just didn't want to hear it. Detectives went through his truck. They found his coffee thermos, half full. His work boots were still behind the seat. Nothing stolen, no signs of a struggle. One of them asked if he had enemies or debt. I said no. He had friends, a job, a family. He wasn't running from anything. He had everything to stay for. By the end of the week, news reporters came. They asked for interviews, filmed the bridge, and took pictures of our house. For a few days, people cared. Neighbors brought food. Others joined the searches. Then, just as fast, they stopped coming. The story moved off the front page. A new headline took its place. That's how it always goes. The worst part was the waiting. Waiting for someone to knock. Waiting for the phone to ring. Waiting for a call that never came. Every night I checked the locks, not because I was afraid of someone breaking in, but because I was afraid he might come home and find the door closed. I wanted it open, just in case. A month later, the police called me in. They said they had done everything they could. No ransom calls, no sightings, no leads. They used the phrase, "presumed missing." I sat there in that small office while they explained procedures, paperwork, forms. I didn't hear a word. My ears buzzed with anger. Presumed missing meant forgotten. It meant they were giving up. I didn't. I kept searching long after they stopped. I went through his things, letters, receipts, photos, trying to find clues. One receipt from a hardware store caught my eye. It was dated the day before he disappeared. I drove there, showed the cashier his picture. The man remembered him, said he bought rope, nails, and a flashlight. Nothing unusual, nothing that helped. At night, I went to the bridge again. I'd sit in my truck, engine off, lights out, just staring into the dark. Sometimes I'd think I heard footsteps behind me. Sometimes I thought I saw something move in the trees. Maybe my mind was playing tricks, or maybe I was just desperate to believe he was still somewhere close. Days turned into weeks. I went from fear to exhaustion to anger and back again. His mother started sleeping in his room. She said it helped her feel close to him. I couldn't do it. I couldn't even look at his bed without breaking. When the police finally stopped calling, I realized I was alone in the search. The rest of the world had already decided how the story ended. But I didn't. Not yet. I told myself I'd keep looking, even if it took the rest of my life. The house changed after he was gone. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a museum for someone who'd vanished. Every room stayed exactly how he left it. His jacket still hung by the door. His watch was still on the nightstand. His bed stayed made, the sheets never touched. I couldn't bring myself to move anything. It felt like erasing him. The radio in his room sat silent, still tuned to the same station he used to play while getting ready for work. I turned it on once and had to turn it off right away. The sound hurt more than silence. I started walking through the house differently, slow, careful, like noise might disturb the memory of him. His mother stopped cooking big meals. She only made soup now, enough for 2 bowls we barely touched. I'd find her standing in the hallway sometimes, holding one of his shirts, just staring at it. I never said anything. There was nothing left to say. People tried to help. Friends came by at first. They brought food. They prayed. They told stories about him, hoping it would comfort us. It didn't. Every story felt like a goodbye I wasn't ready for. One neighbor told me time would heal it. Time doesn't heal the kind of hole that losing a child leaves behind. It just teaches you how to walk around it without falling in every day. The police stopped visiting after a while. They said there was nothing new. The case went cold. That's the word they used. Cold like grief could freeze. Like I wasn't still burning from the inside out. They left me with a stack of papers and a phone number I called less and less. Each time I called, the voice on the other end sounded less interested, less sure. I stopped bothering them eventually. Nights were the hardest. I used to sit by the living room window, watching the driveway. Every set of headlights made me hope. Every silence after made me break again. Sometimes, I left the porch light on just in case. I told myself if he ever came home, he'd know where to find me. I tried to keep busy, fixed the fence, mowed the yard, painted the porch. Small things that didn't matter, just to keep my hands from shaking. But even in work, I'd find reminders. The hammer he used, the gloves he borrowed and never returned. Every nail I drove into wood felt like holding on to him a little longer. His room became a place I both avoided and needed. I'd stand in the doorway for minutes at a time, just looking. The air inside felt still, like time had stopped the day he left. Dust gathered, but I didn't clean it. The calendar on his wall still showed July 1983. The date circled, the week he disappeared. I could never take it down. Birthdays were unbearable. Each year, I'd sit at the table with a candle and a slice of cake. It became a ritual of pain and memory. His mother couldn't do it. She'd go to bed early, pretending to sleep. I'd sit there alone until the candle burned out, whispering promises to the empty chair across from me. Years passed like that. Seasons came and went, but the house never changed. The laughter that once filled it had turned into echoes. The walls remembered what we tried to forget. Every creak of the floor, every door hinge, carried a memory. Sometimes I thought I heard his footsteps. I'd call his name quietly, just in case. Then I'd remember. By the time the 1990s came, our friends had stopped asking questions. People moved on with their lives. New families moved into the neighborhood. The world outside kept changing, but ours stayed trapped in that one summer night. I'd see young men walking down the street, and for a second, I'd swear one of them looked just like him. But when they turned, it was never him. Just another stranger who looked like hope. I stopped expecting phone calls. I stopped expecting the police to find anything. But I never stopped expecting him. Even after 40 years, I still looked at the door sometimes before going to bed, half expecting the handle to turn, half hoping I'd hear his voice again, calling me Dad. The years didn't pass quietly. They just slipped through my hands while I kept looking backward. After the first 5 years, people stopped calling. The police said there was nothing left to investigate. They said words like, no new evidence, cold case, unresolved. But all I heard was forgotten. My wife tried to pretend she was fine, but I could see it in her eyes, the way she watched the driveway every evening, like maybe headlights would finally come up that hill again. They never did. His room became a time capsule, the same posters on the wall, the same jacket over the chair, the same old radio by the window. I couldn't touch anything. Every item in there had weight, not just the kind you lift, but the kind that presses down on your heart. I'd open the door some mornings and stand there, waiting for something to move. Nothing ever did. It was like walking into a photograph that would never change. We grew older, but we didn't grow out of the pain. Birthdays passed without candles. Christmas came and went without joy. I'd put a chair for him at the table every year, even when my wife begged me to stop. I couldn't. That empty chair reminded me that I was still his father, even if I had no son to sit in it. The neighbors stopped asking questions. The new ones didn't even know we had a son. They just saw two quiet old people living in a house that never had visitors. The mail stopped bringing news, and the phone stopped ringing. The only sound left in that house was the ticking of the old clock above the fireplace. I started to hate that sound. Every tick was time reminding me how long it had been since I heard his voice. His mother didn't last forever. She passed before she ever found out what happened to him. I buried her next to an empty grave, a space I had saved for him. I told the undertaker to leave it blank. I wasn't ready to carve a name in stone when there was still a chance, no matter how small, that he was alive. That night, when I came home from the funeral, I sat in his room and talked to the air. I told him she missed him. I told him I missed him too, and I asked why he never came home. After that, I was alone. The house felt even colder without her. Some nights I would hear sounds, a creak in the hallway, a soft thump near the door, and for a second, I'd think he was there. I'd whisper his name, wait, and then the silence would crush me all over again. I started leaving the porch light on every night, just in case he somehow found his way back. It became a habit, one I kept for 42 years. Every year, I visited the police station to ask if there was anything new. Every year, they gave me the same answer. No updates. I could see it in their faces. They thought I was crazy for still hoping. Maybe I was. Hope is a strange thing. It keeps you alive, but it eats you from the inside when it never comes true. When I retired, I filled my days with repairs, fixing fences, repainting walls, replacing tools in the shed. I did it to stay busy, to keep my hands moving so my mind wouldn't wander. But even work couldn't hide the truth. Every nail I drove into wood, every board I cut, reminded me of the boy who once stood beside me with a hammer in his hand. By the time the 2000s came around, the world had changed. People stopped writing letters and started using computers. I never learned how. I didn't want to. The only messages I was waiting for were the ones that would never come. The phone still sat by my chair. I kept the volume loud, even though it rarely rang. Every unknown number made my heart jump, until it didn't. I got old enough that strangers started calling me sir. My hands shook, my knees hurt, but I still waited. Not for the police, not for the neighbors, just for him. I told myself I'd know his face anywhere, even after all these years. I was right, because when I finally saw him again, it wasn't in person. It was on a glowing screen, in a mugshot. And the world stopped moving. It was late, close to midnight. I couldn't sleep again, so I sat in my old chair with the television on for background noise. That's how most nights went now. The sound helped drown out the creaks of an empty house. I wasn't really watching, not until I heard a word that made my head lift. Nevada. Then came the phrase, identity fraud and arrested male, mid-60s. I didn't pay much attention until the anchor said, "Police have released this photo of the suspect." And then it appeared. A face. A face I hadn't seen since 1983. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. The photo was grainy, washed out, but the shape of the face, the chin, the scar above the eyebrow, I knew them. It was him, my son. My chest tightened so suddenly I thought I was having a heart attack. I leaned forward, staring at the screen, waiting for it to disappear. It didn't. His eyes were the same, older, colder, but the same. The caption said Daniel Cross, age 65, charged with multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. I whispered the name to myself. Daniel Cross, not his name, not the one I gave him. The news anchor kept talking, listing cities, charges, false documents, but I didn't hear a word. The blood rushed in my ears like thunder. I felt the air leave the room. My son wasn't dead. He hadn't been kidnapped. He had been alive all these years, living under another name, a new life, a new identity. And I had been sitting here for decades thinking he was lying somewhere in the ground. I turned the volume up, hoping to hear more. They showed another photo, him walking out of a courthouse, handcuffed, flanked by officers. His hair was gray now, his posture slouched, he looked thinner. But I knew that walk. I knew it like I knew my own. He always walked with one shoulder slightly higher from that football injury in high school. It was him. There was no question. My hands shook as I grabbed the remote and rewound the news. I paused it on his mugshot and just stared. The longer I looked, the more I saw. The little things only a father would know. The curve of his nose, the faint dimple in his left cheek, the same jawline his mother used to say, looked just like mine. 42 years had passed, but time hadn't erased him. It had only changed him into someone I barely recognized. I didn't know what to feel. Relief that he was alive? Anger that he'd left? Confusion that the boy I'd raised could live an entire lifetime under a lie? I felt everything and nothing at once. For so long, I'd prayed for one thing: to see his face again. And now that I had, I almost wished I hadn't. The newscaster said he had been arrested for using multiple fake names, running businesses under false identities, and collecting money through scams across 3 states. It didn't sound like my son. It didn't sound like the kind, hard-working boy I raised. But maybe I didn't know him as well as I thought. Maybe I never did. I sat there for hours, long after the program ended. The room was dark except for the glow of the paused image on the screen. I couldn't turn it off. I didn't want to lose sight of him again. It was the only proof I had that he was still real. I reached out and touched the screen, tracing the outline of his face with my finger, like I used to fix his hair when he was a boy. The glass was cold. Around 3 in the morning, the power went out for a few seconds. The image disappeared. The room went black. For a moment, it felt like losing him all over again. When the power came back, the news was over, replaced by static and late-night commercials. I just sat there, staring at the blank screen, unable to move. I wanted to call someone, but there was no one left to call. His mother was gone. The police would think I was crazy. The neighbors wouldn't believe me. It was just me and that image, my son's mugshot, burned into my mind like a photograph I couldn't throw away. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited for the sun to rise, not because I wanted to start a new day, but because I needed proof that the world was still real, that what I saw wasn't a dream. And when the light finally came through the window, I realized something I hadn't said out loud in 42 years. My son was alive, but he was not the boy I lost. He was a man who had chosen to disappear. When the sun finally came up that morning, the light felt strange. It didn't warm me. It just made the truth clearer. My son hadn't been taken from me. He had left. All those years I blamed strangers, accidents, fate. But the only person I should have blamed was the boy I raised. The police hadn't failed. The search hadn't failed. I had. I raised a man who disappeared by choice. The thought tore through me like glass. I went to the kitchen, made coffee I didn't drink, and sat at the table staring at the wall. The mugshot was burned into my mind. I could still see his eyes, not scared, not lost, just distant, like he had erased everything that came before. I tried to understand it. Maybe he was running from something. Maybe debt. Maybe shame. Maybe even from me. But I kept asking myself, what could make a son abandon his family for 40 years? I went to his room again. The same room that had waited for him all this time. The bed still made, the jacket still hanging. The air smelled like dust and old wood. I sat down and looked around. I thought about the nights I sat here praying for a miracle, begging God to give me just one sign that my boy was alive. Now that I had it, I almost wished I hadn't asked. I thought about his mother. How many nights she'd sat in this same spot, clutching his picture, whispering his name like a prayer. She died thinking he was dead. Maybe that was kinder. Maybe the truth would have broken her even faster. She didn't live long enough to see what he became, a man with a new name, new life, and no trace of us in it. I walked to the garage where his old tools still hung on the wall. He used to help me fix the truck there when he was a kid. He was always patient, always smiling, always asking questions. That boy was gone long before 1983. I just hadn't noticed it yet. Somewhere along the line, he stopped being my son and became someone else entirely. As the morning passed, I turned on the TV again, hoping maybe there'd be an update, another mention, something to explain what happened. There wasn't. The world had already moved on. Just another small-town man caught in a big story, a few seconds of airtime, then silence. But to me, it was everything. My whole life reduced to a few seconds of footage and a stranger's face. I tried to tell myself he had reasons. Maybe he was scared. Maybe something terrible happened that night, and he thought disappearing was the only way to survive. But even if that were true, 42 years? He could have written a letter. He could have called once. Just once. I would have forgiven him. I would have welcomed him home. But he didn't. He built another life and buried the one he had. That was the hardest part, knowing he didn't die, but chose to let me believe he did. Every candle I lit for him, every birthday I spent alone, every tear I shed, he was alive somewhere, pretending I never existed. I spent the rest of that day sitting outside on the porch, the same porch where I'd waited for his truck lights so many nights. The sky was bright, but the world felt smaller. My hands trembled as I looked out at the road. I used to think that road would bring him back one day. Now I knew it never would. I don't know how to describe the kind of pain that comes with that kind of truth. It's not sharp. It's heavy. It doesn't scream. It just sits in your chest, silent, cold, permanent. I thought losing him once was bad, but finding out he was alive, that was worse. That night, I went to bed and left the TV off. I didn't want to see his face again. I already knew I'd never forget it. The next few days after seeing that mugshot were unbearable. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Every sound in the house made me jump. I kept the TV off because I was afraid to see his face again, but I also couldn't stop thinking about it. That one image had replaced every memory I had of him. The boy who used to laugh in this very house was now a man with cold, empty eyes in a mugshot. I sat for hours at the kitchen table, just staring at the wall, replaying everything from that summer in 1983. Why did he leave? What happened that night? Was he scared, angry, running from something? From me? The questions kept coming like a storm I couldn't stop. I had blamed fate for 40 years, told myself maybe an accident took him, or some stranger hurt him, or maybe he lost his memory. But this wasn't fate. This was choice. He didn't vanish by accident. He erased himself, and us, on purpose. I pulled out the old box of his things from the closet. The baseball glove he used as a kid, his school ID, his first paycheck stub, the birthday card he made me when he was 10 that said, "You're the best dad in the world." I held that card in my hands for a long time. The handwriting looked so small and innocent. I wondered when that boy disappeared, not the one who went missing, but the one inside him who used to love his family. I found myself talking out loud without realizing it. "Why?" I asked the empty room. "Why did you do it?" The air didn't answer. The silence had been my only company for decades, but now it mocked me. For years I'd cried over his loss. Now I was angry. Not the kind of anger that shouts, but the kind that burns slow and deep. He let his mother die believing he was dead. He let me grow old alone. He made strangers write headlines about him while I kept his picture on the wall. I started thinking about the details again. His truck by the bridge, the wallet found near the water, the missing footprints. It all made sense now. He staged it, every bit of it, the perfect vanishing act. He wanted to disappear, and he did. But why? Was it guilt? Trouble with the law even back then? Or did he just want to leave behind the man who raised him? I couldn't accept it. I wanted to know everything. I looked for the number of the Las Vegas Police Department online. It took me half an hour because I don't use computers much anymore. My hands shook as I dialed. When the officer answered, I told him my name, my son's name, and what I'd seen on the news. He asked me if I was sure. I said, "A father doesn't forget his son's face." He said he'd make a note and pass it along to the detective in charge. That was all. Just like that. A lifetime of pain, reduced to a note in someone else's file. I hung up and sat there in silence. The clock ticked loud in the kitchen. I realized I had been waiting 40 years for a phone call that wouldn't change a thing. I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I was waiting for the truth to hurt a little less. That night, I opened the curtains in his room. The moonlight fell across his bed, the same bed he'd left untouched since that night. For years, I had imagined him dead, and somehow that had been easier. Death is final. But this was worse. He was alive, out there somewhere, living as another man, pretending his father never existed. I sat by the window until morning. The world outside started waking up, birds, cars, life. But I felt stuck in that same summer night in 1983. The last time I saw him. The last time I believed in him. The flood of questions never stopped. And I knew they never would. Because the answers, even if I got them, would never bring my son back. Not the one I lost. Not the one I saw on that screen. That boy was gone forever. The next morning, I decided to call again. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I wrote down the case number I'd seen on the news, even though the letters were shaking on the page. I called the Nevada Police Department. The line rang for a long time before someone answered. A woman's voice came through, calm, professional. I told her my name, my age, and that I believed the man they had arrested under the name Daniel Cross was my son who went missing in Pennsylvania in 1983. There was silence for a few seconds. Then she said she'd transfer me to the detective in charge. The detective's voice was low, tired. He asked for proof. I told him I had photos, documents, dental records, even fingerprints from his military application. I still had copies in an old drawer. I had kept everything all these years just in case. He said he'd look into it. I asked him if my son had spoken to anyone since the arrest. The detective paused. Then he said something that froze me. "Sir, he claims his parents died decades ago." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I asked him to repeat it. He said it again, slower this time. He said his parents passed away in the early 1980s. I didn't say a word. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. My son hadn't just left. He had killed us in his story. He had buried his mother and me with his lies. The detective said he'd send a form I could fill out to verify the connection. I said fine, but I wasn't listening anymore. My ears were ringing. The rest of the conversation was a blur. When I hung up, I just sat there with the phone still in my hand, staring at the wall. The world around me felt smaller than ever. 42 years I spent believing he was gone, and now I knew he had chosen to erase us completely. That afternoon, I printed out the photos I had of him, younger, smiling, standing beside his truck. I mailed copies to the detective with a letter explaining everything. The day he vanished, the truck by the bridge, the wallet by the water. I told them I didn't want money, or attention, or news stories. I just wanted to know the truth. Was he safe? Was he sorry? Did he ever think about home? I didn't even ask for contact. I just asked for honesty. Days passed. No answer. I started calling again, every morning. The same woman answered each time, polite but distant. "The detective's unavailable. He'll call you back. There's no new information." Eventually, I realized I wasn't going to hear from them again. My son was alive, but as far as the law was concerned, he was just another name on a case file. And as far as he was concerned, I was already dead. That night, I sat outside on the porch with the phone in my lap. The air was cold. The stars looked the same as they did in 1983. I thought about all the times I had called hospitals and morgues, begging for any information. Now I was calling across states, begging for something worse, recognition. I wasn't asking to bring him home. I was just asking to exist in his story again. I thought about what the detective said, that my son refused visitors. I imagined him sitting in a cell somewhere, older, quieter, maybe still lying about who he was. I wondered if he ever thought about what that lie had cost me. I had lost my wife, my peace, my youth, waiting for him. And now, after everything, he still didn't want to be found. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Finality. Not peace, not forgiveness, just an end. The kind of end you don't want, but can't fight anymore. I realized there was nothing left to search for. The man in that mugshot wasn't my son anymore. He had been gone long before the world thought he disappeared. Before I went inside, I looked at the porch light, the one I'd kept on every night for him. I reached up and turned it off. The bulb went dark, and the house finally matched the truth. He wasn't coming home. He never was. That night was the longest I can remember. I didn't turn on the lights. The house sat in silence, heavy and hollow, every shadow reminding me that I had outlived every version of my family. I sat in my chair by the window, the same one I used to sit in when I was waiting for him to come home. Only this time, I knew he never would. I wasn't waiting for headlights anymore. I was just trying to understand how a father could lose a son twice, once to the unknown and again to the truth. The phone sat beside me on the table. I kept staring at it, half expecting it to ring, even though I knew it wouldn't. I imagined what I'd say if it did. Would I ask him why he left? Would I tell him about his mother's last breath, about how she whispered his name every night until her voice gave out? Would I tell him I forgave him? The truth is, I didn't know what I'd say. Maybe I wouldn't say anything at all. Some wounds are too old for words. Around midnight, I went into his room. The smell of dust and wood polish filled the air. The moonlight came through the curtains and fell across his bed, the same bed that hadn't been touched since 1983. I sat down slowly, the springs creaking beneath my weight. I ran my hand across the blanket. It felt cold, lifeless, like time itself had given up waiting for him. I looked at his baseball glove on the shelf, the one I used to toss with him in the yard. For the first time, I picked it up. I held it tight and felt my chest cave in. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was everything I had left. I whispered his name, just to hear it again in the air. The sound cracked in my throat. I used to imagine that one day, maybe I'd see him again. Maybe at my front door, older but sorry, ready to make things right. That hope had kept me alive longer than anything else. But now, after everything, I knew that man was gone. The boy I raised died the night he chose to disappear. The man in that mugshot was a stranger wearing my son's face. Sometime around 2 a.m, I made a pot of coffee. It didn't taste right. Nothing did anymore. I sat back down in my chair with the mug in my hand, watching the clock tick. Every sound in that house seemed louder now. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the walls, the wind brushing against the windows. All reminders that the house was alive, but empty. I thought about what his life must have been like out there. Did he have a family? Did he ever tell them about me? Did they know what kind of man he used to be? Maybe he had children. Maybe I had grandchildren somewhere in the world who would never know my name. That thought hurt more than anything. I had imagined growing old surrounded by family, not by silence. But I suppose silence is what happens when love becomes shame. The night dragged on, slow and cruel. I thought about all the years I wasted searching rivers, filing reports, begging strangers for answers. Every minute I spent waiting for him was a minute I lost living my own life. I didn't realize it back then. I thought hope was strength. Now I see it was a chain. It kept me tied to a ghost who had long stopped looking back. As dawn started creeping through the curtains, I stood up and went to the front door. The sky was gray, the air cold. I stepped outside, looked down the empty road, and whispered, "It's over." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. I went back inside and looked at the porch light switch one more time. For 42 years I had left it on. It was my signal, my message to him that I'd always be here, waiting. But waiting is a kind of dying, and I'd done enough of that. I turned off the light. The bulb flickered once, then went dark. The house sank into quiet, and for the first time in 4 decades, I didn't feel hope. I felt finality. That was the night I finally stopped being a father. Morning came slow, quiet, and colorless. I sat at the kitchen table watching the light crawl across the floor, turning everything pale and empty. It used to be my favorite time of day, the start of something new. But that morning, it felt like an ending. The kind of ending you don't celebrate. I poured a cup of coffee, took one sip, and left it untouched. The world outside was moving again. Birds chirping, cars passing, people heading to work. But inside this house, time had finally stopped. I walked to the wall where his pictures still hung. The one of him fishing as a kid. The one from his graduation. The one of the three of us, smiling like life would never break us. I looked at those photos and realized they didn't belong to me anymore. They belonged to a different world, one that ended 42 years ago. I should have taken them down, but I couldn't. A father's love doesn't disappear just because the truth does. For a long time, I thought pain came from not knowing. I thought the worst thing in life was uncertainty, that hollow space where answers should be. But I was wrong. The worst pain is knowing. Knowing he chose to leave. Knowing he looked at everything I gave him, my work, my time, my heart, and decided it wasn't enough. Knowing he built a whole new life while I built a grave for a son who wasn't even dead. I kept thinking about his mother. I was grateful she never saw this. She died holding on to hope. I'll die holding on to truth. I'm not sure which is worse. Maybe hope was the kinder lie. I would give anything to believe again, even if it wasn't real. As the hours passed, I found myself walking through the house one last time, touching the things I'd avoided for decades. The kitchen counter where he used to sit and eat. The door frame where his height was marked in pencil. His room, untouched since the day he left, still smelled faintly of wood and dust. I opened his drawer and found the small pocket knife I gave him when he turned 16. He carried it everywhere back then. I sat on his bed holding it for a long time. The knife was clean, sharp, still folded, like time had frozen the day he walked out. I whispered something to the empty room. Not forgiveness, not anger, just goodbye. I had spent too many years speaking to silence. It was time to let silence speak back. Later that day, I boxed up a few of his things, not to throw them away, but to finally stop pretending he'd need them. The glove, the pictures, the knife. I didn't cry. I think the tears ran out years ago. Grief doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes with acceptance, a quiet, cold kind that doesn't hurt anymore because there's nothing left to break. As the sun began to set, I went to the porch again. The light outside was golden, the kind that used to make the world look soft. I looked down that same old road, the same one I had stared at for decades. For the first time, I didn't imagine him driving toward me. I imagined him driving away, and I let him go. I don't hate him. I can't. You don't hate your own blood, no matter how deep they cut you. But I don't love him the same way anymore either. The man I saw in that mugshot isn't my son. My son is still 24, still smiling in those pictures on the wall, still standing in the doorway saying he'll be back before dark. That's the version I'll keep, the one who never left. I know my story won't make sense to everyone. People like endings that tie things up neatly. Reunions, apologies, forgiveness. Mine doesn't have any of that. It just has truth. And truth isn't neat. It's rough and heavy and sometimes too late. He went missing in 1983. Last night, I found him again. But not the way I wanted. The world calls it identity fraud. I call it the moment I stopped waiting. My son didn't die by accident. He died by choice, and that choice finally set me free.